Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I believe the length of our call will be at about an hour or under, just depending upon how many questions are covered and the length of the answers and so on. Of course, there's nothing set in stone here. So my name is Robert Stanley, and I'm here with Lori Toye today. Lori is the author of A Teacher Appears and the I Am America Maps. Most of you already know who she is, but for those who don't, Lori began her journey of Ascended Master teachings since the 70s. And through her interactions and communications, built the I Am America Maps, and through dreams and daily meditation, she brought forward this prophecy of the earth changes. And the process of creating those maps and communicating with the Ascended Masters came to be. So in our survey, that was a result of many of you signing up for the audio edition of the Teacher Appears book. You filled out that survey and answered many, many questions, and it really did help us better understand and help Lori better understand what you were looking for, what you're seeking. Now, certainly she has a great understanding at a metaphysical level of what's going on in the world, but in terms of what people need and want for guidance, that is really where the survey came into play and helped us a great deal. Along those lines, Lori and I spoke a few minutes before we started this call, and I asked her, if she could give us a state of things, what's new and changing. And I believe that, Lori, you wanted to say something about the maps and just kind of a feeling that you're getting recently. Could you make a brief statement about that before we get into the survey responses?
Oh, yes, of course. And before I begin, I just want to thank everyone for taking the survey and helping us to know more a little bit about you. And also just thank you for supporting the I'm America message all these years. Yes, Robert and I were talking about the possibility of the upcoming changes, of course, which is, the nexus of the I'm America message altogether. And, of course, the beginning I'm America map was published in 1989. And those prophecies were really received in the late 80s. And I've been asked, throughout the years, do you have any new material? What's happening? Make it pertinent now. And, of course, in the mid-90s, we published the six-map scenario, which was really a fabulous presentation of prophecy because it showed basically how consciousness creates the type of world that we live in. And the master teachers, of course, were conveying that through these terrific visuals and also different series of prophecies and really explored some very dynamic ideas like simultaneous reality and how we are literally shape-shifting our reality in the present moment, which is also that realization of the I Am and why we remain so focused upon those spiritual tenets. But really, in terms of the now time and what's happening, there's no doubt about it that we are living in a very polarized time, in a very polarized world. And, you just look at the daily news and you can see just what is happening and how there just seems to be so many different ways now that are kind of colliding with one another. And in terms of earth changes, I often think that Mother Earth is mirroring our consciousness and telling us in either a very significant way, as in Fukushima, or in very minor ways in terms of what types of weather patterns and changes that we're having. Of course, this was quite a year with the flooding in Colorado, fires in Arizona, fires in California. I mean, it just seems like global warming is escalating. So one thing that I have been feeling for the past year is that I want to work on an updated I'm America map, which we are planning to do and hope to release in the next year. Of course, I'm in process on that now. I will be receiving more information as we proceed along that. And I'm also in process of producing another map that I feel is extremely foundational to understanding really how prophecy works. And this is called the Map of the Ancients. I focused upon this material in the third volume of my book, the series, Golden City series. And this is actually a map of how the Earth looked before we went into the time period we are experiencing now. And so it engages us to look at other civilizations that may have existed before we did. And so what this does is tells us that these cycles are very natural, that they have happened before, and perhaps they will happen again, that it is all part of just a natural state. But I'm excited to share this information. I think it's very good information. It's in-depth. It also shares the foundational spiritual teachings, which I feel at any given time we can shapeshift all of these realities, these present weather patterns that we're seeing. And that's not to sugarcoat the prophecies, because as Robert and I were talking in the beginning, I said, I do feel that some of these changes are imminent, and especially now with global warming, I think we will see some of those changes. But I also just want to reiterate, as we've said for so many years, that a change of heart can change the world, and indeed, within your heart is a gentle revolution that can redirect the course of such events.
Well, thank you for sharing that and that wonderful opening statement. I think at this point, before we get into covering many of the questions, I wanted to take a moment to thank everyone for filling out the survey as you did earlier, and then share with them some of the responses. Now, we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people respond to the survey, and again, we appreciate that, taking the time to do it. And as a because you took your time to share that information, I'd like to share the results. So when the very first question we asked is, do you believe that you have a greater purpose or calling? And nearly 90%, and something like 86% of those who took the survey felt like they did. Now, we have some folks who gave us some open answers there and shared with us where they are in their journey. And, we asked what term best describes you, and the majority of the responses, 28% of the people who took the survey used the word spiritual. Or others said, hey, I'm more than that. We had an open-ended option there where they could say, I'm more than that. I'm not only spiritual, but I'm also metaphysical. I'm religious. I believe in the power of positive thinking. I believe in prayer. I believe in meditation. So what's consistent across the answers, though, is that everyone believes and feels in spirituality, and that's consistent with the message that Lori brings. Another series of questions that was asked was, were you interested in spiritual growth, golden cities, earth changes, ascended master teachings? Those responses were fairly even across the board, and some of our open-ended questions that were towards the end there really indicated that most who took the survey wanted information on all of it, but were at different points in their path, their individual path. And so Lori and I talked a little bit about how that could be shared. And it's one of the reasons that in the survey we asked, how would you like to consume information? So would it be calls like this? Would you like to go to a live event with Lori? Would you, consume online content like videos? And again, we had some wonderful answers there. I think that it was pretty consistent that so far, you have enjoyed the videos that Lori has shared, and she has plans to create more of those, so we'll continue to do that. And then we'll continue to update and add other options like calls and books and PDFs and various ways that you can consume that information. Now, one of the most important parts of this survey process was what we call an open-ended question. And basically, the question proposed was, if you had some time to sit down with Lori and ask her directly something, what would you ask? And because we have nearly 1,000 folks that took the survey, obviously we couldn't allow everybody to come on and take a call live. So what I did on your behalf is I sat down and I went through the piles and piles of responses, and I distilled those down into a set of questions that best represented your questions that you presented. And so I'm going to go over those now. I'm going to act as your avatar and ask those questions of Lori. So, Lori, if you're ready to start answering those questions, I'll begin.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
Okay. So the first question that we would like to have answered is as follows. So, if I feel like I'm meant for more, and I really just haven't started my journey, and I'm early in this process, what should I do to begin my personal journey to find my purpose or calling or the next step?
That's always one of the most soul-pressing questions. What is my purpose in this life? I think probably the best place to start is with meditation. Now, I know not everyone is well suited for meditation. Some people do have trouble calming their mind. But I do think that meditation is very good because it allows us to get our consciousness to a different level. And I would say that first level is a level of receptivity, where we're able to receive new information, new ideas, new perceptions. If you do have trouble with meditation, then I think probably the next place you could go would be prayer. Just start asking, when you have a calm moment, start showing me divine presence, start showing me my divine purpose in this lifetime. And then start paying attention, because there'll be little subtle things that will happen. Just start looking for the little ahas, the little things that happen. I know that when I began my journey, which was in the 70s, that was how I started. I started through just asking. I just started asking, show me, reveal to me. And I literally would go into bookstores, and sometimes I would just walk up and down the aisles and run my finger along the aisle of the bookstore, and then I'd wait to hear something say, this book. And so it may be a really innocuous title, but then I would just open it up to a page, and there I would receive some information that would guide me for that day. And so what I'm explaining here are small steps, small ways to start, and then take a little bit bigger chunk and a little bit bigger chunk. But in the beginning, I think just start by asking, and I honestly feel you will not be denied.
That's a great answer. So what if I have already started a journey in the past? I've been serving others, and I've been doing what I've considered my calling, but I feel unfulfilled, or I feel like I'm at a crossroad now, or something has changed, or maybe I was on the wrong path from the very beginning. What should I do if I felt like I started out correctly, but I now feel misguided in some way?
Oh, I understand that. I think all spiritual students and aspirants feel that way on the journey. It's kind of like that chop wood, get enlightened, chop wood, get enlightened. I think that oftentimes when we get to those points where we just are stuck, that's when we actually are growing the most. Even though it may seem like everything has just come to a dead stop, it's also a very profound time, because that's the time where in that deep silence, I think we have actually more contact with our God presence, with the I Am. And so, but if you need to move it on, and you just are not content, there's many things that you can do. One thing that I have found that has helped me when I've gotten stuck is I use a lot of mantra. Of course, I'm a student of Hinduism, but I'm also a student of I Am teachings. And I use a lot of decrees. And in my books, of course, there's a lot of different ones that you can utilize. I will speak them out loud. I will use them in prayer. I will use them in meditation. In fact, sometimes I'll even take them and write them down on a piece of paper and then burn them. But there's many different ways that you can work with them. And I think that that's why the spiritual teachers have given the decrees, because they are like these power statements. They are ways that they can remind us that we are so much more than just, beings on this treadmill of life, that we are indeed, these spiritual beings having a human experience, as we've heard so many times. And I think we must then begin to start reaffirming our divinity. And I think in that process, we begin to get ourselves unstuck. As for being in wrong place in terms of perhaps we might think, well, this has been the wrong path. I'm personally one of those people. I don't think anything's wrong. I think that everything that we do actually feeds a course of our direction of where we're supposed to be. I believe in synchronicity, and I think that synchronicity is very important, that nothing happens by mistake. In fact, that's what the master teachers often say, there's no mistake, ever, ever, ever. All events and circumstances and situations are all interconnected and interwoven. And so it's really an opportunity to grow beyond maybe a self-limiting belief, and also to expand your awareness to now time.
I think that final statement kind of leads to this next question, which is an interesting one, because you've basically said that any path you've followed is kind of the way it's supposed to be for you. And we had a couple questions along the lines of physical addiction. So if somebody's having physical addictions like drugs or alcohol or some other issue like that, and they know that they want to go this direction, they know they want to separate from that, what's your recommendation for them to follow the proper path?
Well, I always think it's fascinating because, the I am is that higher power that I think so many addicts and alcoholics seek, when they go to 12-step meetings. That's what they're looking for. They're looking for that God connection that is internalized, that's personalized, that can give them that everyday guidance. It's interesting, and I think it's points of perception. We actually asked that question of the master teachers, and they talked about how people who engage in addiction and alcoholism and have these troubles, that they're actually very well suited for actually getting into these types of teachings, because they talked about the fact that they could engage in a pattern so readily and so easily. And what I have discovered over time, after nearly 30 years of dealing, with and working with spiritual development, that everything gets down to a practice. Enlightenment and spiritual contentment is something that doesn't happen overnight, but it is something that will happen if you practice it every day. It really does get down to the work, to the practice, to the everyday application. And what you begin to realize is that over time, things do begin to lift. And you do begin to feel that sense of peace that so many of the great spiritual teachers have spoken about.
Well, this question is going to kind of come from me, because I think it's relevant to what the first question was, which is how do I begin my journey? And you responded saying with meditation, and so you just said everyday application. Could you, if I'm just getting started, say tomorrow, what would my everyday application schedule look like? Should I meditate first thing in the morning, or can you give me a general sense of where you think I should begin?
Well, everyone's different. Everyone's going to have different habits. They have different earthly requirements. But it is harder. I mean, they talk about this in Hinduism, that the householder, he who holds a job, he who takes care of a family, it's harder. It's very much harder than the ascetic, who just denies all worldly possession and goes and lives in the mountains and meditates every day, meditates for 8 hours a day. But I think perhaps the best thing, every day what I do upon awakening is that I use the violet flame. And that's been a very important part of my life and my process. And you can learn about the violet flame on my website. You could just Google the violet flame, and you'll find tons of information about it. And, of course, the violet flame is also, mentioned in many of my books. But the violet flame is a fascinating spiritual practice. And the reason why it works so well is because if you want to intellectualize it, it's just using the law of forgiveness and also the law of transmutation. What it does is it, allegedly by the spiritual teachers, is that it begins to transmute negative karmas and uplifts our consciousness to a new level. And maybe the first couple of weeks, maybe in the first month that you start using the violet flame, you're not going to feel too much. But then after a while, you're going to say, hey, something is different. Something is happening in my life. Something is changing. Something is shifting. But I like the violet flame because you can use it in under 5 minutes. You've actually worked on a spiritual practice that day. I sometimes will use the violet flame prior to moving into meditation. And so then I might then spend, 15, 20 minutes in meditation. And, there's literally hundreds of how to meditate tapes out there, so I'm not going to get into, how do you meditate. But it is a great precursor to meditation. So I think that those are two things. Of course, I also believe that prayer of any type is good. I like to end my day with prayer. But that is me. I think everyone must find what works best for them. What is their best combination? But of all the techniques I think that the spiritual teachers have presented, I vote for violet flame.
Okay, well, we have a few more questions that are similar that we'll get into a little later, but some recurring questions that came up from our survey related to the golden cities. And so one that I think a lot of people have concerns about is, am I in the right golden city? So how do you know which city you should go to first or which one you should end up at? Is there a rule? How do I figure this out?
There are some rules that I can use esoterically, yes. I can examine astrology charts and I can look for dominant ray forces in charts and be able to tell people, yeah, this is the golden city that's really best suited, for your spiritual growth and evolution. But I really rely on personal experience, and I think if you are a meditator or you're tuned in intuitively, just ask and you will then be told which one makes sense for you. You can also travel to different ones, feel their energies, feel the difference in their subtleties and their nuance, and you then also will know, if that golden city is a good one for you. So there's a lot of different ways that you can actually, work with these new energies that are coming in this time, to actually raise our spiritual consciousness.
So along those lines, and being in a golden city location, do you? And I know you get this question a lot, but it's worth repeating, I suppose, because it gets asked every time. Do you have a timeline as to when these earth changes will truly begin?
I think that's a really terrific question because, naturally when we first started with this information, we thought it was now, that we were not going to have too much time left. And, of course, that was late 80s. And so as soon as the I'm America map was published, I loaded 500 of them in the back of my car, and I took off, down to California at the time. And I gave away many maps to different New Age centers and engaged in a living room speaking tour. I would literally go wherever I could go to share the information because I felt it was so vital and necessary that people heard this. I felt like I was literally, quote-unquote, warning people. But through that process, what happened to me is that I began to understand something much more about this information, that this was not so much about something that was set in stone, that our consciousness was also involved in this, our spiritual state, and that as we could grow and evolve through this message and actually work with the material, that we could shape-shift some of these prophecies into a different reality. But that said, in A Teacher Appears, and I was doing a lot of the research to create the book from these transcripts that had literally sat with dust on them for years. The master teachers in that set of transcripts, they talk about reference points, and they say that when they give events or talk about possible or probable events, that they say they're just reference points. And I didn't even know what a reference point was, so I looked it up in the dictionary, and this is the definition. They say it's a position in the landscape of the ever-present now where one can evaluate or weigh probability. So, that in mind, a reference point is placed so that we can initiate comparison between actual events, prophesied events, and then the possibility of their timing. So when they give an actual event, then we must look and see, and then use, heart and mind along with that to evaluate, is this a possibility? Is this something that we may see? So that's how I look at it, Robert.
Do you think that's because where the information is coming from is a place where time isn't really the same for us as it is for them?
Exactly. It's just not pertinent for them. They come from a fifth-dimensional reality. Remember, they are lowering their energy while we are heightening our energy. So we're literally expanding our energy to meet them. They are contracting their energy down to us. And so time, it really is kind of thrown out of kilter. So if they say this is going to happen on such and such a date, the likelihood of that happening is inordinately rare. I don't think it would. It's just very hard for them to pinpoint it. But I think it's better if we kind of look for trends and look for things that are actually happening, as our consciousness is also shape-shifting reality.
So we're looking for these indicators, signs. What if we're in the wrong place? I mean, will we survive if we're not in a golden city as these things happen?
I think the golden cities really have been presented more as a place for us, number one, that we can go to, we can visit, to actually use to uplift our consciousness, to gain new perceptions of fourth dimensional interaction. That is the plane of vibration, so that we can begin to interact with a different reality, very, very different than third dimensional reality. So that is the first purpose of the Golden Cities, a place for us to realize our spiritual potential. But the Golden Cities, what I feel in the big picture, are really more about the future communities. That is the areas of the future. You notice most of them are inland. Most of them are in rural areas. And so these are places that I think what they're saying is in the next couple hundred years are going to hold more of the enlightened communities of the future. But that doesn't mean we can't participate in them now and visit them. And some people are actually moving to them and really enjoying them and integrating a lot of the, the really finer, higher spiritual energies that are there for us now. In terms of safety, the master teachers, they never really say if you live in a golden city you will be safe from this or safe from that. That isn't really where they're coming from in it. What they're indicating, Robert, is that these areas are spiritually higher. And because they have a higher vibration, therefore there is just naturally built within them a level of safety. Because higher vibration usually means that you are more free from conflict, more in a place of harmony, more free from disease processes. So therefore that's why they say that these are areas you can go to that will not only, heighten your energies, but also, help to increase longevity. So there's other benefits that are available there that we're just beginning to learn about. In the Golden City series, there's many teachings about the Golden Cities and just how they work, and I've done quite a bit of research in the back of all the books, which contain pretty detailed appendices about these concepts.
Now, along those lines, and selecting a golden city and location and all these other things to consider, what is your message to those who are outside of the United States?
Well, there are, of course, 51 golden cities throughout the entire world, and I'm so happy to announce that we have Freedom Star World Maps available now. We just did a recent reprint of those, so those are available. So there are golden cities all throughout the world. There's a lot of esoteric science behind it, and not to get too bogged down into that, but there are 3 sets of 17 golden cities, and the first set of 17 golden cities is in the America, which is, North, Central, and South America. The second set of 17 golden cities is known as the greening map, and that's Asia, China, and Australia. And then the final set of golden cities, which is known as the map of exchanges, is Europe and Africa. And I really get into the details of how these work, because people can actually journey between them if they want to, or also you can just simply learn about the doorways, which are the 4 directions in the golden cities, and just how you can use these to acclimate your spiritual energies and integrate for the new times. Okay.
Now, I'm going to go step back just a little bit, and then I do have some more questions about locations. But I have 2 questions here, and I feel like I should ask them separately, even though they're very similar. One of them is, how can you continue to pursue your life's purpose, or even, move to a location if you're a caregiver for children or someone that's elderly? And I know you understand this because when this first came to you, you were a young mother, right? So how did you balance that, and how would you recommend others do that?
Well, of course, it's different for everyone, and everyone has their own path of how things will work out for them. I had 3 small children when I started this work. Now I'm a grandmother. They're all grown. And it was, I look back on it, I kind of wonder, gosh, how did I do that? But we did move. We actually decided at the time I was living near the small town where I had grown up, and the farming community where I had lived originally. And we decided that we wanted to live in Gobi, and we wanted to live in the Southwest. And it's almost like once we made that commitment to do that, the door was open for us. We were shown the way. I can't say that it was easy. It wasn't. There were many there were many new things that we had to learn as in our process of what is known as migration to a golden city. But it was very kind of an exciting time to actually intentionally live in a golden city and to integrate that and to live with this purposeful intent. But it is harder when you have kids, and it's harder also if you have a partner who doesn't want to move with you. So that's why I suggest to learn the material and actually, to work on your meditation technique, because I've met many people who do not live in golden cities and actually meditate and travel to the golden cities and integrate energies. And there are techniques that are taught in the books how to do that. So there's a lot of different ways that you can actually accelerate your development and begin to understand what is being offered at this time, to accelerate our growth into the new times.
Okay, so this kind of ties into that, but this sounds like someone who, and I'm sure this isn't the only scenario like this that you've heard before, but what do you do, or how do you deal with personal sovereignty versus family responsibilities? What if you're feeling trapped, or your partner isn't as cooperative as your husband was in this time of change for you? I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, some people just feel trapped in some scenarios.
I know they do, and I meet a lot who actually encounter that. Some are able to really transcend that issue and grow into acceptance of their partner, and it actually brings them closer at a different level, even though they may be on 2 different levels entirely altogether. And fortunately, I've never had to deal with that. But there are also situations where sometimes the spiritual growth, that the distance between those 2 people just becomes irreconcilable, and they go their separate ways. And I'm not an advocate of that either. I think it's all personal choice. So it is interesting. I meet a lot of people who, when they enter their spiritual journey, they will have that as kind of at the forefront of one of the major issues that they're dealing with. And I would say it's sort of a 50-50. Some say they're able to do enough spiritual work to get the relationship to transcend, to move to a new level. And some simply, they go their separate ways. And
so I assume that for each person it's a different journey, and obviously you can't walk that path for them.
No, you can't, because everyone has their own karma and then their own purpose to fulfill in this life.
So this is kind of an interesting question, and I'm not sure I entirely understand it, but I'm guessing you will. And the question is, why do we as humans continue to strive to become spiritual beings while on Earth? Why didn't we just stay where we came from? Or, why do we keep going back and forth?
Kind of a chicken or egg question, I guess. It's a good question, actually. Hinduism sort of addresses a lot of that. they claim that that we want to know and learn how to become creators or co-creators. That is, to self-affirm our own mastery of creation. And in the Bhagavad Gita and in many of the different texts ascribed to Hinduism, they talk about lokas, L-O-K-A-S, lokas or levels of dimensional experience. And we travel. We're sort of soul travelers, and which is part of what they would call a transmigration process. But we travel between these different dimensions, these lokas of experience. And some are very, very high in terms of a vibration of physical body and physical manifestation, but very, very low in terms of spiritual energy. And then you'll find other ones where maybe the conditions aren't that great, but the energies are really, really high spiritually. The earth, they claim, is known as Burloka. That is, it's mid-range, not the highest, not the lowest. So the spiritual teachers allege that we come here basically to learn about the heart. This is a place where we learn to develop our heart chakra. So this is a planet or a vibration of love. And so we're learning all of these aspects of love. And so I guess that is really what we're working to learn about and to basically master, for lack of a better word, and be able to understand how that fits in the co-creation aspect.
Now, speaking to that, when you're talking about love, we're not talking about getting engaged and married, right?
I'm speaking about higher love, not to channel Steve Winwood here, but the higher love. This is a higher love. And
so can you describe that just a little bit?
Heart-opening, heart chakra love. This is a love that's based on what the master teachers would call the Christ consciousness. You know, much of what is taught through the I Am America teaching is Western tradition. There's some Hinduism, some Buddhism thrown in there, but it's all basically based upon this idea of Christ as our teacher, our messenger of higher energy. And the Christ consciousness, of course, they claim is one of the highest levels that we can attain. That is here on Earth. And it's an unending energy of unconditional love. That is a vibration and energy, almost what many people will call like the field, or what Luke Skywalker calls the force. It is an energy that once we are able to access and enter into, it actually helps us to heal at a more holistic level. That is, we heal spiritually, we heal mentally, we heal emotionally, we heal physically. So I'm not getting into the teachings of Jesus Christ. What I'm talking about is the teachings that he brought forward and how we're applying them metaphysically and working with them at a higher level, integrating them with the other great avatars and messengers that have come in Buddhism and Hinduism, Sikhism, the many, many ways that there are. Remember that these teachers, they don't ascribe to one religion or one political ideology. Instead, they see that everything is as one and that all paths are leading to the one. And they would call that higher one the Christ consciousness.
Now, you said something earlier about when you're with a partner or someone else who doesn't want to move or stuck, and then you talk about, I guess it's acceptance. Would you say that when you're speaking to love in that sense, that it's almost an acceptance of everything, or how would that relate to that other scenario where the individual feels somewhat trapped at that level and then they're ascending in some fashion?
So, of course, I think it's part of, when you enter into the ascension process, we start developing a sense of forgiveness and self-forgiveness. And that process gets us into that unconditional love that I was talking about prior, which I think the best description that the spiritual teachers have called that is the process of allowing someone to be who they are, and then accepting that person the way that they are. And acceptance, I have found, is a powerful key, because once we can accept a situation the way it is, then we realize there really isn't anything to change. And there really isn't anything that I must do other than accept the situation for what it is. Now, of course, you would hope through that process, through giving that level of unconditional love, that then that relationship can evolve to a higher level. And in fact, I'm working on that now. The next book in this trilogy, I'm working on Sisters of the Flame. Very powerful lessons on love, emotion, and the awakening, and how we can work with our relationships to actually bring them into this higher, more evolved level.
Okay, so here's something that isn't at such a high level, but it's a question, that exists in many folks' mind, which is, why do we as humans continually strive to change our environment? Why don't we just exist as nature does? I mean, why do we go from living in fields to building cities? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't have any really clear-cut answers on that. I have some ideas why it is that way. According to the master teachers, we're entering into a new time, what they call a golden age. But it's really known overall in Hinduism as the golden age of Kali Yuga. That is, we are really more in a downward time period. And I don't want to bore the listeners too much with this because they can find a lot of it on my website. But this is based on the Puranic timing of yugas, or cycles of time, which has to do with light as it streams from the galactic center. And this light actually calibrates human consciousness. It will predicate how long we live. It predicates our respect for spiritual knowledge and also our overall condition of life. So I think that there have been other times on Earth, what would be known as a golden age or a Krita Yuga, a large span of time, where I don't think we even lived in houses. I think that we live more in our light bodies, and we sort of hang out in much more perpetual bliss, and our needs are not as defined as they are right now in our physical bodies. And then, of course, a silver age or a Trita Yuga, a little bit less and a little bit less, and Dwapara Yuga, 50% like spectrum. Right now it's a luxury yarn Kali Yuga. We have about 25% light spectrum coming in from the galactic center. This is also what the Mayans have been talking about. But the spiritual teachers prophesy that as we enter into this golden age Kali Yuga, which we're in right now, that we will hit some really high levels of galactic light, and that we will not be so stuck in our need for materiality and in our need to corrupt the earth, if you will. So I think it's all kind of predicated for us by this quality of light that is actually coming physically to the earth at this time.
So are you saying that even someone who is very, physically oriented, so attracted to objects and, cars, houses, and such, will even experience a shift in consciousness? They'll start to feel enlightened?
I'd like to say yes to that, Robert. But realistically, I also know that the spiritual teachers have said, there'll just be some people, they won't make it. They're not going to shift. And they're going to live in a whole different world, and there'll be a group of people who will make this shift. The Hopi talk about that. They talk about that as the two worlds. The two worlds will exist simultaneously, side by side. And I think that's sort of the world that we are experiencing now. That we're really seeing that line of demarcation even more powerfully as we move into the new times. I also think that there's a chance for us in this whole transcendence process, the ascension process, for us to move to a new level. That is, we may transcend our need to be in physical body and maybe live more in these higher dimensions. I think that it's not limited by possibility whatsoever.
Okay, so this brings up another question. It's interesting. I think this is directed to, what do I do about loved ones? But here's the question. Why do so many people seem to be asleep, just kind of doing their work and ignoring what's coming, and what can I do to help them?
Accept them. This is how I understand this. At this time, there's a lot of people here. We're all clamoring to be here at this most important time to learn and to grow spiritually. They say that when the Earth, this Earth or a planet, enters into a time period of this great change in light frequency, and also we might see changes in our whole earthly landscape, that it is an honor to be here and an honor to be alive. I think there's a lot of truth in that. But there are many people at different levels of vibration. Some people have the content of a shot glass in terms of spiritual consciousness, and some people have a quart, some people have a gallon. And so for the people that have a gallon, it's really hard because they keep pouring their gallon of information into the shot glass. And I think that's a good way to understand it. And so instead of, tiring yourself out by doing that, I just think it's best, to accept that many people are at different levels. The master teachers always talk about that, to accept and to allow, and then to continue on your path, and to start identifying for yourself what is your own truth.
So this is a recurring theme here, acceptance, and so maybe what I hear you saying is, and feel free to correct me, is that when you find yourself concerned about someone else and trying to change the way they are, you're really not accepting the situation, and you're not accepting what's to come, or even their ability or inability to change. Yes,
and I think sometimes even in that aspect of accepting and allowing almost does cause a shift for them, because then you've given them that unconditional love. So you're not placing any restriction on how, quote unquote, they should be.
Okay, so I have about 3 more questions, and this one could be a long one. I'm not sure, because this question obviously comes from somebody who knows more than I do. And the question is, what are the best ways to bring the understanding and internalization of the 7 rays into our everyday lives? Which I don't know what the 7 rays are, so maybe you should discuss that first.
Well, the 7 rays are basically, they evolved out of Hinduism. The 7 rays are foundational in all ascended master teachings. And the reason why they are is because each of the master teachers, the Elohim or the archangels, resonate to a color and light frequency. And I just sort of extract this down into really easy stuff. I try to not use numbering on ray systems because I think it's way too confusing, because over time there's been hundreds of different teachers of ascended master tradition, and they'll use a numbering system, and they'll say, no, well, the first ray is blue, or the first ray is yellow, or whatever, and it's too confusing. So I just get into colors and go right there. And that's exactly how it is mirrored in Hinduism, where I think this teaching all comes from. The 7 rays are actually the 7 planets, and how those 7 planets, the 7 traditional planets, vibrate. Now, in Hinduism, they use 9 planets. They use Rahu and Ketu along with the 7 traditional planets, and Rahu and Ketu are the moon's north and south node, and they treat them as planets or positions in the sky where the sun or the moon can be eclipsed. But the traditional planets do not include the outer planets, which are Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus. So they of course have always believed that these are a huge influence, not only in how our life is arranged, how our life it plays out in terms of events that are meant to happen, and certain karmas that are fixed and certain karmas that are able to be transcended. And so the 7 rays, really their history comes out of that. And there's even a deeper history behind that, and points of perception and light of awakening. I really get into that if people are interested. And in order to integrate them, I think really mantra is best. And mantra, of course, is Hinduism. And the Vedic rishis, of course I've talked about this in one of my YouTube videos, the Vedic rishis would enter into these deep states of trance and leave their bodies and travel to the planets where they actually would feel the vibration of the planets and hear the sounds that those planets make. And so on my website, you can look it up. It probably would be under the consultation with Lori, but I've got some information of the different bija seed mantras, one-syllable mantras that these planets make. And I think that is a really wonderful way to start to integrate the energies yourself personally, physically, into your light field of these planets, because when you chant those mantras, they will simulate that same vibration and energy of that planet. Now, with the rays have meaning, and basically what they are, they're archetypes of consciousness. And so, for instance, like each of these master teachers, when we work with them, spiritual teachers, they represent sort of an idealized aspect of human consciousness, which is also then mirrored in the rays. And so it is a very fascinating study when you begin to correlate the two systems, because then you can really begin to understand it and use it more at a personalized level. I hope that explained it.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, for me personally, I can't speak for everyone else necessarily. I think that that's a level of understanding and study that requires you've gone to a certain point in your journey. Is that safe to say?
Yes, because you start to actually, when you enter into meditation, you'll begin to see certain colors. And then those colors, actually, it's you traveling inwardly, and you're beginning to see the auras of the spectrum of your own, or the colors of the spectrum of your own light field.
And so, for those that are, just getting introduced to this, or just realizing that this is a direction they want to head, this probably seems very confusing and even strange. What would you say to them?
Simplify. Use white light. That's probably the best place to start. Just visualize white light. But the rays are, I can go through them, for those students out there that want to know and understand them. You have the blue ray, you have the pink ray, you have the yellow ray, white ray, green ray, what they call ruby and gold ray, and then violet ray. And those are the colors. Those are the 7 colors that are used in the spectrum of teachings. And it's almost like a language when you begin to talk about the ray forces or the rays. This is what Alice Bailey talked about. This is sort of one of the underpinnings of theosophical thinking. This is all about the rays, but really what they're talking about, Robert, are the colors that are in our light field and how the human body is interacting in its spiritual journey here and evolving through that journey. And in fact, it's interesting. Dr. Michael Newton, in one of his books, he did a lot of research with hypnosis and lifetime between lifetime, and he found out that more evolved souls often had more of a blue color to them or a purple tinge to them. And as people evolve and begin to work on their spiritual evolution through their journey, there might be one ray force they more identify with. For instance, like the blue ray is a ray of the will of God. These are people that they just speak the truth. They can't help it. They just say it the way it is all the time. Then there's the yellow ray. It's a color of wisdom, and that's yellow. The pink ray, which is a color of love. And so people start to identify more with these individualized aspects of Godhead. And so I know that might even be, again, a little more too complex, but that's just a sampling.
Yeah, and again, much of this is explained on your website at LoriToye.com, right? I mean, you have a ton of free information.
About the 7 rays there.
Right. Now, this is going to go to a slightly different question, and we had a number of people ask this, and the question is along the lines of community and lifestyle, and the question is, I would like to live in a community that focuses on the lifestyle that you offer, and I get the sense that it's like, how do I get involved into a community that focuses on these topics? And I don't know what you have to say to that.
Well, that's sometimes easier said than done, so it's going to take some work on everyone's part who wants to participate in that. Of course, I advocate sustainability at all levels, and I think that there are many different sustainable organizations, eco-villages, as one that just comes to me right off the top of my head. I'm trying to think of other organizations. I know that the Findhorn organization out of Scotland is affiliated with another group of sustainable communities. It seems that sustainability and these communities that really are helping to heal the earth at this time, there are not as many in the United States as there are in Europe, and it seems to be more of a foreign concept to us, but it's evolving and it's growing here. I think there's a lot of people now in the United States that are realizing this deep need, and many are returning to rural environments, but also in cityscapes. A lot of people are getting involved in the home farming movement and actually getting into growing their own food, growing gardens, and working towards sustainability at whatever level they can. And I think that this is very healing. Even if it's just if you become your own community, because sometimes it's just really difficult to connect with like-mindedness. And so I'm a great advocate of that even just growing your own garden is a very powerful spiritual act. In fact, Thomas Males, Lutheran minister, I don't believe he's living any longer, but he wrote a great book called The Hopi Survival Kit. And it was all about how we can kind of move into our own sense of personal community and how we can actually play a role in helping the earth to heal at this time. And he basically outlines in there, through Hopi prophecy, just to grow corn and to grow your own garden, and what a personal journey that can be, and actually reconnect you back into the earth at this time.
So this is an interesting topic of discussion because, the idea of sustainability implies that you have room to, grow your own food and build your own community. And then what you had said earlier about golden cities tending to be rural, is there some sort of correlation there?
I think there is. I think that we are all realizing that we've kind of lost our organic root, literally, viscerally, not only physically, because we're really working now to kind of re-identify our food sources and what's healthy and good for us, because it seems like if we have good food, we're able more to be grounded to the earth in a good way, and also then to evolve and grow spiritually. It's always been fascinating to me when you're talking about the demographics earlier. It does seem like good health and diet are very much interconnected with spiritual growth and evolution. It's almost hard to separate them. They seem to be one and the same. So sustainability just really naturally fits in there.
So I'm going to have a tough time becoming centered and growing if I'm eating McDonald's. Is that what you're saying?
I think it is more difficult. I mean, or wired on, 4 cups of Starbucks a day.
Yeah, and not to isolate any particular company or whatever, but just food that isn't from the earth.
In fact, well, I love Starbucks, but I agree.
Yeah, but in order to grow, we need to be, closer to our food source. I think there's a lot of, to reinforce what you're saying, I think there's a lot of movements out there. That's the organic movement and things like that. People are starting to realize, and maybe that is falling back in line with the changes that are just happening. People are realizing we're too disconnected.
I think it's a way that we can physically begin to experience and live our truth. And I think that sustainability is a way that we can connect back into a more natural experience.
Okay, I have one more question here. Well, no, actually 2 more. One that I'm going to ask, which is, as a parent, with what's going on with children these days with video games and so on and so forth, or even if they're nephews and nieces, what is your recommendation for guiding younger people?
Oh, that's a tough question, because again, I'm one of these people, I don't like to tell others what to do. But I personally, for me, I grew up in a generation where we played outside and we left for the day, and our mothers and dads didn't worry about us, but I know it's a different world today, and I just think that there are a lot of other systems that are out there that really can support childhood in a good way. One that I've always advocated, of course, is Montessori method, and also Rudolf Steiner and his methods, which I feel are really good.
And so they're along the lines of teaching and learning styles.
They are, and they're based, of course, on freedom and personal choice. In fact, I used a lot of Montessori in raising my children, and I got very good results from it. Inevitably, we ended up in a more traditional environment in private Catholic school, but I think that Montessori method that I employed while the children were really young, that they really got a lot of good out of that, and realized that everything was personal choice. Of course, today we have sort of an interesting anomaly that there's a lot of new children that are being born. They're kind of known as the seventh man new, the new children, the indigo children, and that's kind of an interesting anomaly in terms of just how that's going to impact the earth. But what they are, Robert, are these new children that are being born right now. The spiritual teachers claim that they come from other star systems, that they haven't really ever been on Earth. But they're really here as a type of divine intervention and to help raise the vibration of Earth. And there's a lot of good books out about, raising these new children because they're very different. They're very independent. They're very freedom-loving. They really have a more oneness, natural oneness about them. I've met many of them, and there's no doubt about it. They really are special beings, and they're here to help us.
Well, that's all I have for the list of questions, and I want to thank you for your time, Lori, and for those that were able to attend. There is a question in here that I think kind of can wrap things up, and I know that based on the responses, a lot of folks would really want more information. They want more interaction and feedback from you, and are just really sponges looking for more information. So, if people want to stay connected to you, if they want to have more opportunities to be on calls or be involved in a mentorship program, I know that there's stuff in the works. What do you have to say about staying educated, staying connected, following you, and seeking guidance from you?
Well, probably the best thing is to sign up for our newsletter. They can do that at LoriToye.com or LoriToye.org. We've been pretty good about getting newsletters out on a monthly basis and staying in touch with our list. There's a lot of good resources on LoriToye.com that they can get in and read. But also A Teacher Appears. Of course, that's a great place to start. You can either buy the ebook from Amazon. You can listen to it free on audio at LoriToye.org, and also purchase it from us at our bookstore if you want a paperback. So those are some good places to start and to stay in touch with us.
Now, along those lines, though, the A Teacher Appears book is you mentioned earlier, is a series. And how many books are in the series, and what's the premise? What's the main message?
There's 3 of them total, and A Teacher Appears is about the I'm America trilogy. Overall is all of these foundational teachings that I never published before because, of course, at that time I was more focused on sharing the Earth Changes material. But so all this little bit of information, it got kind of kicked to the side, and when I was organizing the Golden City series, my editor took a look at it, and she said, you need to publish all of this because it's so foundational. It really helps people to understand the beginning journey. And so A Teacher Appears is really a story of acceptance. And it's about, that question, could I overcome my fear and doubt and surrender to this process of change that I myself was in at that time. And then Sisters of the Flame is the second book. And this is a story of empowerment. It's love, emotion, awakening. But inevitably, it's a story of how to become empowered with spiritual energies. And for me personally, what I talk about is, could I overcome being alone and being fulfilled with my spiritual growth and development, and then also utilizing the information of the spiritual awakening. So whereas Teacher Appears is more, the opening, Sisters of the Flame develops that theme and gives really good, more spiritual instruction of that spiritual journey and a lot of the techniques that you can develop. Then the third one, which we hope to release next year, Fields of Light. And this is more about self-actualization. And can I accept the manifestations of my desires through the law of attraction? And then share this message of brotherhood, hope, and love. And so it's really a great trilogy. And I think it's a good way for people just to get sort of an orientation with the I'm America teachings and just how they can use them to make their life better and to start on their own spiritual journey.
And so 2 of those books are out now, is that correct?
Well, Sisters of the Flame, Teacher Appears is available now. Sisters of the Flame will be available in February. So it won't be long, and we'll be releasing that new title. And then hopefully we'll be following up as soon as possible with Fields of Light.
Okay. Good. Now, if somebody wanted to, and I know that you don't open yourself up to this much, but if somebody wanted direct mentorship interaction with you, is that even a possibility? And if not, what alternatives do you have available?
Well, of course. They can always email me at Lori at I'm America, and we can either I can put them in touch with a group in their area, or I can help mentor them, just to get them started until we have. We're contemplating now, something to put into place for further education, something a little more organized and formal. But there are several groups that are functioning now in the United States, and so people really should just email me, and we can see what we can do for them.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for everyone for attending. I would like to give you a chance here, Lori, to make any closing remarks if you wanted to say something, or we can just end it here if you'd like.
Well, I just wanted to thank everyone again for coming onto the call, and we hope to do another one of these soon. And I'm looking forward, to hearing personally from all of you, your input and your own spiritual journey, and I have lots of thanks and appreciation for your presence today.
Thank you very much, Lori, and thank you everybody who attended. We will be making this recording available. We'll email that out to you as soon as it's processed. So thanks again for joining us, and thank you, Lori. I look forward to talking to you again very soon.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.